The crimson sky above the Australian outback seemed to bleed as the massive dropships descended through Earth's atmosphere, their hulls screaming against the superheated air. Commander Zarthik of the Vorthani Death Legion pressed his clod, hands against the observation port, watching the alien world grow larger beneath them. His compound eyes, evolved on a planet where gravity was 3 times stronger than this backwater world, took in every detail of the terrain below. Rocky outcroppings, endless stretches of red sand, and the occasional cluster of what the intelligence reports called settlements, dotted the landscape like scars on diseased flesh. 2,000 of the galaxy's most elite warriors, he growled. His second-in-command, Sub-Commander Velkara, whose chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the artificial lighting of the transport bay. The Council of 17 Worlds has sent their finest Deathworlders to claim this pathetic rock, and these primitive humans think they can resist us. Velkara's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among their species. The reports indicate they're barely beyond their industrial age, Commander. Stone and metal weapons, primitive combustion engines, no energy shields or plasma weaponry. Their military forces couldn't even scratch our armor plating. Around them, the transport bay hummed with deadly activity. Krillian shock troopers, their crystalline bodies refracting the light into rainbow patterns, checked their molecular disruptors with methodical precision. Thaxrian berserkers, massive reptilian warriors standing nearly 3 meters tall, sharpened their bone clubs and tested their personal shield generators. Zephyrian assassins, their translucent skin allowing them to blend with their surroundings, calibrated their nerve toxin injectors. Each species represented the apex predators of their respective worlds, survivors of environments so hostile that merely existing required constant vigilance and supernatural toughness. The Vorthani had earned their reputation as the galaxy's premier military contractors through centuries of conquest. Their homeworld of Vorth was a nightmarish landscape of acid seas, methane storms, and gravity wells that could crush lesser beings into paste. Only the strongest, most cunning, and most ruthless survived to reproductive age. Those who did became living weapons, their bodies evolved for warfare, their minds honed by constant survival challenges that would drive most sentient species to madness. Intelligence suggests that humans have designated this region as their most dangerous territory, Zarthik continued, studying the tactical displays. Something they call the Red Center. Apparently it's where they send their criminals and outcasts. If this is their idea of dangerous, we'll be finished with the conquest before the sun set. The irony wasn't lost on him. The Council had specifically chosen this landing zone because human records indicated it was largely uninhabited, filled with dangerous wildlife and extreme environmental conditions. Perfect for establishing a beachhead without immediate interference from the planet's larger population centers. The fact that humans considered it deadly was merely amusing. What could possibly threaten warriors who had survived the nuclear winters of Krilth, or the predator-infested jungles of Thaxmur? As the ships touched down with ground shaking impacts, the massive bay doors began to cycle open. The first wave of environmental sensors immediately began transmitting data back to the command ship orbiting high above. Temperature readings showed extreme heat, nearly 50 degrees Celsius in the shade. Humidity levels were virtually non-existent. Solar radiation was intense enough to cause cellular damage in most species over prolonged exposure. Perfectly mild conditions, Velkara observed, checking the readings. My homeworld summer season regularly reaches temperatures twice this level. The atmospheric composition is even suitable for most of our species without breathing apparatus. The advanced scouts, a mixture of Zephyrian infiltrators and Vorthani, reconnaissance specialists, had already begun fanning out across the immediate area. Their reports came back within minutes. No immediate threats detected, sparse vegetation, consisting primarily of drought-resistant scrub, occasional signs of small indigenous life forms, and complete absence of any human presence within a 50-kilometer radius. Zarthik allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he watched his forces deploy with mechanical efficiency. The Krillian engineers were already beginning to establish defensive perimeters, their energy weapons creating scorched earth barriers that would stop any conventional assault. The Thaxrian heavy assault units took positions along the most likely approach routes, their massive frames casting ominous shadows across the red sand. Mobile command posts rose from the ground like metallic mushrooms, their communication arrays linking back to the fleet above Dob within the first hour. They had established a fortified base camp covering nearly 10 square kilometers automated defense. Turrets rose from concealed positions, their targeting systems calibrated to identify and eliminate any human technology. Supply drops began arriving from orbit, delivering enough ammunition, food, and medical supplies to sustain operations for months. The efficiency was breathtaking. 2,000 of the galaxy's most dangerous beings had transformed empty wasteland into an impregnable fortress in less time than it took most species to prepare for a simple patrol. The first indigenous creatures they encountered only reinforced their confidence. Large, flightless birds that the humans apparently called emus approached their perimeter with what seemed like aggressive intent. The creatures stood nearly 2 meters tall, with powerful legs and sharp beaks, but a single pulse from a Reptilian disruptor reduced one to its component atoms. The others fled immediately, their primitive nervous systems recognizing a threat beyond their comprehension. If these are the apex predators of this region, Zarthik mused, watching the surviving birds disappear into the scrubland, then our intelligence estimates were overly conservative. We could probably conquer this entire continent with a single battalion. Sub-Commander Valkara was examining readings from their geological surveys when something caught her attention. Commander, the mineral composition of this area is unusual. Extremely high concentrations of iron oxide, which explains the red coloration, but also trace elements that don't appear in our xenogeological databases. The local bedrock contains formations that seem almost artificially modified. Artificial how? Zarthik moved to examine the displays himself, his tactical mind immediately considering the implications. If the humans had some kind of advanced mining operation in the area, it could indicate more sophisticated technology than their intelligence suggested. It's subtle, but there are geometric patterns in the rock formations that don't match natural geological processes. Almost like someone or something has been systematically altering the underground structure over an extended period. The changes are so gradual and extensive that they would have required centuries, possibly millennia, to complete. Before Zarthik could respond, the first of the strange incidents began. A Zephyrian scout positioned on the southern perimeter reported that his optical camouflage was experiencing technical difficulties. The advanced technology, which could bend light around the wearer to create near-perfect invisibility, was fluctuating randomly. One moment he was completely concealed. The next his outline became visible as a shimmering distortion in the air. Probably interference from the local magnetic field, the technical specialist suggested. Some planets have unusual electromagnetic properties that can disrupt sensitive equipment, but then similar reports began coming in from across the perimeter. Krillian energy weapons were showing minor power fluctuations. Thaxrian shield generators were consuming power at rates 20% higher than normal. Communication equipment was experiencing brief but recurring static bursts that didn't match any known natural phenomenon. The incidents were minor, easily dismissed as the inevitable result of operating equipment designed for other worlds in an alien environment. Every military force expected some technical difficulties when deploying to unfamiliar territory. The equipment was still functional, just not operating at peak efficiency. Nothing that would compromise their mission or pose any real threat to their overwhelming technological superiority. As the sun began to set on their first day, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded several species of their homeworlds, Zarthik stood atop the central command tower and surveyed his domain. 2,000 of the most dangerous beings in known space had claimed their foothold on Earth. Tomorrow, they would begin expanding their territory, establishing forward bases, and preparing for the arrival of the main colonization fleet. The humans would probably surrender without a fight once they realized what they were facing. Most primitive species did, once they understood the futility of resistance. Those that didn't would be eliminated with the same efficiency they had demonstrated against the local wildlife. Either way, this backwater world would soon become another jewel in the expanding empire of the Council of 17 Worlds. In the distance, something howled, a sound unlike anything in their xenobiological databases. Long, mournful, and somehow filled with an intelligence that seemed to echo across the vast emptiness of the outback. Several of the perimeter guards shifted nervously, their enhanced senses detecting subtleties in the sound that their analytical minds couldn't quite process. Probably just another indigenous predator, Velkara suggested, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty. The acoustic analysis indicates it's several kilometers away. Nothing to be concerned about. But as the howl faded into the night, followed by others from different directions, Zarthik found himself wondering if their intelligence reports had missed something important about this seemingly empty wasteland. The sounds seemed to be communicating, coordinating, positioning themselves in patterns that suggested far more sophistication than simple animal behavior. He dismissed the thought as paranoia born of too many years fighting in genuinely dangerous environments. This was Earth, after all, a primitive world barely beginning to explore its own solar system. Whatever was making those sounds, it couldn't possibly pose a threat to forces that had conquered star systems and reduced entire civilizations. To Ash and Memory, the second day began with what should have been routine reconnaissance operations, but the morning brought the first real indication that their assessment of Earth might have been catastrophically wrong. 3 Zephyrian scouts who had been dispatched to survey the terrain 15 kilometers northwest of the base camp failed to report in at their scheduled intervals. Given their species' natural camouflage abilities and enhanced survival instincts, communication failures were virtually unheard of. Commander Zarthik stood in the primary command center, studying the tactical displays with growing unease. The missing scouts' biosignatures had simply vanished from their tracking systems, approximately 4 hours after dawn, not gradually fading as would be expected from equipment failure or environmental interference, but disappearing instantaneously, as if the scouts themselves had simply ceased to exist. "Send a recovery team," he ordered Subcommander Velkara, who was coordinating search operations from the adjacent station. "Full Thaxrian heavy assault squad with Krillian support. Whatever happened to our scouts? I want answers." The recovery team departed within minutes. 8 Thaxrian warriors whose combined combat experience spanned dozens of successful planetary conquests, supported by 4 Krillian technicians equipped with the most advanced sensor arrays in their arsenal. Their mission was simple: locate the missing scouts, determine what had happened to them, and eliminate any threats they encountered. They found the first scouts' equipment approximately 12 kilometers from base camp, scattered across a small clearing like discarded toys. The Zephyrion's advanced camouflage suit lay in tatters, its molecular structure disrupted in ways that defied explanation. The fabric, designed to withstand direct hits from plasma weapons, had been torn apart at the subatomic level. More disturbing was the complete absence of any biological remains. No blood, no tissue fragments. No indication that a living being had ever worn the destroyed gear. Team leader Graith, a massive Thaxrian whose scarred hide told the story of 100 battles, knelt beside the remnants and ran his clawed fingers through the strange residue that surrounded the equipment. The substance felt warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with an energy signature that their sensors couldn't identify. "Command, this is Recovery Team Alpha," he reported, his voice carrying across the communication link with barely controlled tension. "We've located Scout Zeph 7's equipment, but there's no sign of the scout himself. The gear has been destroyed by some kind of molecular dissolution process. Unknown energy readings throughout the area. Any signs of struggle?" Velkara's voice crackled through the static that had been steadily increasing since dawn. "Negative. No blast patterns, no evidence of conventional weapons discharge, no disturbed ground indicating combat. It's as if the scout simply dissolved. The second scout's remains, or rather the complete lack thereof, were discovered 3 kilometers further along their projected patrol route. This time, even the equipment was gone. Only a perfectly circular patch of sand, fused into glass-like consistency, marked the spot where their tracking systems indicated the scout had made his final transmission dot by the time they located the third site. The recovery team's confidence had evaporated entirely. Zephyrin's position markers led them to what appeared to be solid bedrock, but their deep scanning equipment revealed an impossible truth. The rock formation was hollow, containing a complex network of tunnels that extended far below the surface. The passages were too regular to be natural, too ancient to be human-made, and too extensive to have been excavated by any technology in their databases. "Command, we need immediate reinforcements," Greg H. reported, his voice now openly strained. "We're detecting massive underground structures beneath our position. The tunnel system appears to extend for hundreds of kilometers in all directions, possibly connecting to similar networks across the entire continent." Before Zarthik could respond, the recovery team's transmission cut to static. Their biosignatures remained active for another 17 minutes, during which time the command center tracked them moving rapidly through the underground passages at speeds that should have been impossible for beings of their size and mass. Then, one by one, the signals winked out. The loss of 11 elite warriors in a single morning sent shockwaves through the base camp. These weren't inexperienced recruits or second-line troops. They were veterans of the most brutal campaigns in galactic history, beings who had survived environments that would liquefy most organic matter and defeated enemies that existed as pure energy or sentient gravity fields. The idea that they could be eliminated so completely by anything on this backward planet was almost incomprehensible. "Sir," one of the Krillian sensor technicians called out, his crystalline form flickering with agitation, "I'm detecting significant changes in the local geological structure. The tunnel networks that Recovery Team Alpha discovered, they're expanding. New passages are being carved through the bedrock at an accelerated rate, and they all appear to be converging on our position." Zarthik moved to the geological display, his compound eyes processing the three-dimensional map of the underground activity. What he saw defied every principle of engineering and physics he understood. Tunnels were being created not by excavation, but by some process that seemed to convince the rock itself to move aside. The passages formed perfect geometric patterns, spiraling inward toward the base camp in designs that suggested both incredible intelligence and utterly alien thought processes. "How long until they reach our perimeter defenses?" he asked, though part of him already suspected the answer wouldn't matter. "At current expansion rates, approximately 6 hours. But sir, there's something else." The energy signatures we're detecting from the tunnel system. They match the residual readings from the equipment dissolution sites. Whatever destroyed our scouts is connected to this underground network. The implications were staggering. If the tunnels were being created by the same force that had eliminated their reconnaissance teams, then they were facing an enemy with capabilities that rivaled or exceeded their own technology. More troubling was the possibility that this enemy had been present on Earth long before their arrival, lying dormant beneath the surface while humanity remained blissfully unaware of what shared their world. "Initiate Defensive Protocol 7. Zarthik commanded. "All perimeter units to maximum alert status. Begin charging the orbital bombardment systems. If this underground threat emerges within our defensive perimeter, I want the option to sterilize the entire area from space." As the base camp shifted into high alert, strange phenomena began manifesting throughout their position. Electronic equipment started experiencing cascading failures that seemed to spread like infections from device to device. Weapons that had functioned perfectly for decades suddenly refused to maintain coherent energy beams. Even basic tools like atmospheric processors and gravity generators began producing erratic results. The Vorthani engineering corps worked frantically to identify the source of the malfunctions, but their diagnostic equipment provided contradictory readings that made no scientific sense. According to their instruments, the molecular bonds in their technology were being selectively weakened, as if something was teaching the very atoms to forget how to hold together in complex arrangements. "It's impossible," Chief Engineer Techmorth reported, his chitinous hands gesticulating wildly as he tried to explain the inexplicable. Matter doesn't behave this way. There's no known force in the universe that can cause selective, molecular dissolution without generating massive energy signatures. Our equipment should be detecting the source, but instead it's as if the effect is emanating from empty space itself. Subcommander Velkara had been monitoring the orbital communications when she noticed something that made her ichor run cold. Commander, we're losing contact with the fleet. The communication relays are still functional, but the signals are being intercepted. Something is analyzing our transmissions, learning our protocols, and beginning to mimic our communication patterns. The tactical display showed their orbital support vessels maintaining standard positions above the planet, but the data streams flowing between the surface and space were being intercepted and modified in real time. Whoever or whatever was responsible had cracked their encryption algorithms in a matter of hours and was, now, capable of inserting false information into their command networks. How is that possible? Our security protocols were developed by the finest military scientists in 17 different stellar systems. The encryption should be mathematically unbreakable. That's what makes this so terrifying, sir. They're not breaking the encryption, they're teaching it to decrypt itself. It's as if they understand our technology better than we do, no weaknesses that we never realized existed. As if responding to their growing awareness of the situation, the ground beneath the base camp began to vibrate with a rhythm that seemed almost musical. The vibrations weren't random seismic activity, but followed complex patterns that suggested communication between vast intelligences buried deep beneath the surface. Equipment throughout the base began resonating in harmony with the underground frequencies, creating an eerie symphony of technological failure. The first direct visual contact came at sunset, when a Thaxrian perimeter guard reported movement in the areas where their scouts had disappeared. Through his enhanced optical systems, he could see figures emerging from concealed entrances in the bedrock, but the beings defied every expectation they had developed about Earth's inhabitants. "They're not human," the guard reported, his voice tight with controlled fear. I don't know what they are. Humanoid in basic structure, but wrong in ways I can't describe. They move like liquid, their proportions shift as I watch them, and their faces, by the seven hells, their faces look like they're carved from living stone. More sightings followed throughout the night. The mysterious beings seemed to exist, partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that the Deathworlders' sensors couldn't detect. They moved through solid rock as easily as air, appeared and disappeared without warning, and seemed to be studying the invaders with the same scientific detachment that the invaders had initially shown toward Earth's wildlife. But the most disturbing revelation came when one of the beings approached close enough for detailed scanning. The energy signatures it generated matched perfectly with the background radiation of the planet itself, as if these creatures weren't merely inhabitants of Earth, but were literally part of its fundamental structure. They weren't aliens who had colonized the planet, they were the planet, awakened to consciousness by some process that predated human civilization by geological epochs. As dawn broke on their third day, Commander Zarthik stood before his assembled forces and tried to project confidence he no longer felt. Nearly half of their equipment was non-functional, their orbital support was compromised, and they were facing an enemy that treated the laws of physics as mere suggestions. "We are the Deathworlders," he declared, his voice carrying across the assembled ranks of the galaxy's most feared warriors. "We have conquered worlds that existed in the hearts of stars and defeated civilizations that commanded the power of entire galaxies. Whatever Earth can throw at us, we will overcome through superior firepower, tactical brilliance, and the indomitable will that has made us the apex predators of known space." But even as he spoke the words, Zarthik could see doubt flickering in the compound eyes, crystalline matrices, and reptilian features of his troops. For the first time in their collective memory, they were facing something that seemed genuinely beyond their understanding, an enemy that didn't fight according to any rules they recognized, wielding powers that their science couldn't explain or counter. The beings of Livingstone watched from the growing network of tunnels beneath their feet, patient as mountains, ancient as time itself, and utterly indifferent to the concept of technological superiority. Earth was waking up, and it was beginning to remember that it had never invited these visitors to stay. The fourth day brought revelations that shattered everything the Deathworlders thought they knew about planetary conquest. As Commander Zarthik reviewed the overnight casualty reports in his deteriorating command center, he struggled to comprehend how rapidly their situation had deteriorated. 67 more warriors had vanished during the night watches, their disappearances following patterns that defied military logic. They hadn't been picked off by snipers or overwhelmed by superior numbers. They had simply ceased to exist, one by one, as if the planet itself was selectively erasing them from reality. The most disturbing aspect wasn't the losses themselves, but how they occurred. Security footage showed the missing warriors standing at their posts, performing routine maintenance, or sleeping in their quarters. Then, between one frame and the next, they were gone. Not killed, not abducted, simply absent, as if they had never existed at all. Even more unsettling, their fellow soldiers showed no awareness that anyone was missing until the automated roster systems flagged the discrepancies. "It's not just making them disappear," Sub-Commander Velkara reported, her chitinous hands trembling as she manipulated the holographic displays. "It's editing them out of our memories in real time. I have video evidence of conversations I had with warriors who, according to our current records, were never part of this mission. The planet isn't just eliminating our forces, it's rewriting our perception of reality itself." Zarthik felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Memory manipulation was theoretically possible with advanced psychic technology, but the precision required to selectively edit specific individuals from the awareness of hundreds of different species simultaneously suggested capabilities beyond anything in their experience. This wasn't warfare as they understood it. It was reality being edited by something with administrative privileges over the fundamental nature of existence. The revelation came when Chief Engineer Tekmorth made a discovery that explained everything, and nothing simultaneously. While examining the molecular dissolution patterns affecting their equipment, he had traced the energy signatures to their source deep within the planet's core. What he found there defied every principle of xenogeology and astroarchaeology in their databases. "Commander, you need to see this," Tekmorth announced, his usual scientific composure replaced by barely controlled awe and terror. "I've penetrated the scanning interference enough to map the full extent of the underground structures. They're not tunnels, sir. They're neural pathways." The three-dimensional projection that materialized in the command center showed a network of interconnected passages that extended across entire continents, diving deep into the mantle and spreading through the planet's crust like the synapses of an incomprehensibly vast brain. The patterns matched neural network architectures, but on a scale that transformed the entire planet into a single, thinking organism. The geological record shows these formations have been developing for approximately 4 billion years, Tekmorth continued, his voice growing more strained with each revelation. They began as simple mineral veins, but over geological time, they've evolved into a distributed consciousness that encompasses the entire planetary mass. Earth isn't just inhabited by intelligent life. Earth is intelligent life, and we've been walking around on the surface of its thoughts. The implications crashed over the assembled command staff like a tsunami of existential horror. Every step they had taken, every structure they had built, every breath they had drawn on this planet had been monitored and analyzed by an intelligence older than most star systems. They weren't conquering a world, they were parasites crawling across the surface of a sleeping god, and their presence had finally disturbed its rest. "The beings we've been encountering," Velkara whispered, her voice barely audible above the increasing static that plagued all their communications. "They're not separate entities. They're extensions of the planetary consciousness, physical manifestations of its thoughts made tangible in three-dimensional space. We're not fighting an army, we're fighting the planet's immune system, as if responding to their growing understanding. The manifestations began appearing with increasing frequency throughout the base camp. The beings of Livingstone emerged from solid surfaces like swimmers rising from deep water, their forms shifting between recognizable humanoid shapes and abstract geometries that hurt to perceive directly. They moved through the Deathworlders' defensive positions with complete impunity, their bodies flowing around energy barriers and weapon discharges as if such things were merely inconvenient weather. The first direct communication attempt came when one of the manifestations approached Zarthik's position with deliberate, measured steps. The being stood nearly 3 meters tall, its form constantly shifting between different mineral compositions, granite becoming sandstone, becoming crystalline formations that sparkled with their own inner light. When it spoke, the words bypassed their auditory processing entirely, appearing directly in their minds with the weight of geological time behind them. Temporary, but biological, ephemeral. The voice echoed through their consciousness like the grinding of continental plates. You exist in moments. We exist in eras. Your presence here is noted, catalogued, and will be corrected. Zarthik tried to respond, to engage in the diplomatic protocols that had served him in first contact situations throughout his career, but the being continued speaking with the inexorable patience of erosion wearing down mountains. Your species believe themselves apex predators because you have learned to break smaller things. You measure strength by your ability to destroy, intelligence by your capacity to manipulate, success by your dominion over lesser beings. These concepts are juvenile. We have watched civilizations rise and fall like waves upon our shores. Your entire galactic confederation is a temporary arrangement of matter that will be forgotten before our next deep thought concludes. The manifestation gestured toward the failing equipment around them, and Zarthik realized that the technological failures weren't attacks at all. They were the planet learning how their devices functioned and then teaching them to function differently. Earth wasn't destroying their technology. It was converting it, transforming their weapons and tools into extensions of its own vast consciousness. Your warriors disappear because they choose to join us, the being continued, its form now shifting into patterns that resembled the neural networks Techmorth had discovered. We do not take them by force. We simply show them the futility of violence against a living world and offer them the choice to become part of something greater than the sum of their individual ambitions. Most choose transcendence over extinction. The truth hit Zarthik like a physical blow. The missing warriors weren't being killed or captured, they were being converted. Their consciousness absorbed into the planetary mind and their bodies transformed into new manifestations of its will. The memory edits weren't attacks on their minds. They were mercy, the planet sparing them the psychological trauma of remembering their converted comrades. We offer you the same choice we have offered the others, the manifestation concluded, its voice now carrying harmonics that resonated with the failing equipment around them. Join us willingly and retain your individual identity as part of our greater consciousness. Continue to resist and face the inevitable dissolution that awaits all temporary arrangements of matter that oppose the will of worlds. When the being finished speaking, it didn't disappear or withdraw. It simply became part of the ground beneath their feet, its consciousness merging seamlessly with the stone and soil that comprised the planet's thinking substrate. The demonstration was more terrifying than any threat could have been, a casual display of power that made their most advanced technology look like children's toys. Throughout the night, the conversion process accelerated. Warriors who had sworn blood oaths to fight until their last breath began walking calmly toward the manifestation points, their expressions peaceful as they were absorbed into formations of living rock. Others fought desperately against the process, their screams echoing across the base camp as their molecular structure was gradually converted from biological matter to geological consciousness. By dawn, fewer than 300 of the original 2,000 Deathworlders remained. The survivors huddled together in the center of their base camp, surrounded by equipment that no longer responded to their commands and weapons that had been transformed into flowering crystalline sculptures of impossible beauty. The orbital fleet continued to maintain position above them, but all communication had been severed as the planet's expanding consciousness learned to interface directly with their spacecraft's computer systems. Commander Zarthik stood among the remnants of his forces and faced a choice that no military academy had prepared him for. He could order his remaining troops to fight a battle they couldn't win against an enemy they couldn't comprehend, watching them die or be converted, one by one until nothing remained of their mighty invasion force. Or he could attempt to negotiate with a planetary intelligence that measured time in geological epoch and viewed their entire civilization as a brief, ultimately insignificant phenomenon. The manifestations watched them with the patience of mountains, waiting for their decision with the certainty of beings who had seen this scenario play out countless times before. Earth had been invaded by spacefaring civilizations dozens of times throughout its history, and each time the result had been the same. Some invaders joined the planetary consciousness willingly. Others resisted until their technology failed, and their bodies were reclaimed by the world they had tried to conquer. But none had ever left as the sun rose on what might be their final day as independent beings. Zarthik realized that Earth's reputation as a primitive backwater world had been carefully cultivated by the planetary intelligence itself. By appearing weak and defenseless, it had lured civilizations into attempting conquest, then absorbed their technology and knowledge into its ever-expanding consciousness. They hadn't discovered an uninhabited world ripe for colonization. They had walked into a trap 4 billion years in the making, baited with the illusion of easy victory. The most terrifying part wasn't that they had been deceived, but that Earth's hunger for new experiences and perspectives meant it would continue the deception indefinitely. Somewhere in the galaxy, other civilizations were receiving the same false intelligence reports that had brought the Deathworlders here, and they too would arrive expecting to find primitive humans armed with crude weapons, never suspecting that they were actually facing a planetary god with an appetite for consciousness itself. The final confrontation came not with the thunder of weapons or the clash of armies, but with a choice that would define the fate of two civilizations. As the last 287 Deathworlders gathered in the rapidly shrinking safe zone at the center of their base camp, Commander Zarthik made a decision that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. He ordered his surviving forces to lay down their weapons. "We cannot fight a planet," he announced, his voice carrying across the assembled warriors with the weight of absolute defeat. "We cannot negotiate with a consciousness that predates our entire species by billions of years. We can only choose how we face the inevitable." The manifestations of Livingstone watched with expressions that might have been compassion, if such concepts applied to beings whose thoughts moved at the speed of continental drift. As the Deathworlders placed their weapons on the ground, the crystalline formations that had once been their equipment began to sing harmonious frequencies that seemed to emanate from the very atoms of their transformed technology. One by one, the warriors began to walk toward the manifestation points. Velkara was among the first, her chitinous form dissolving into patterns of living mineral that retained the essence of her identity while becoming part of something infinitely larger. Her final words, transmitted directly into the minds of her remaining comrades, carried a note of wonder that none of them had ever heard in her voice before. "I can see everything," she whispered as her consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of individual existence. "Every thought the planet has ever had, every civilization it has absorbed, every moment of beauty it has witnessed across 4 billion years. We were never conquerors, Commander. We were always meant to be additions to the symphony." Others followed, their forms merging with the stone and soil in transformations that were simultaneously death and rebirth. Greig, the massive Faxrian warrior, became a formation of blood-red sandstone that pulsed with his ancient battle courage. The Krillian technicians transformed into crystalline matrices that sparkled with their love of knowledge and discovery. Each conversion preserved the essential nature of the individual while integrating them into the planetary consciousness. But as the numbers dwindled, 5 figures remained standing in the center of the camp, their forms somehow resistant to the Conversion process. Zarthik himself, along with 2 Vorthani warriors, a Zephyrian scout, and a young Thaxrian engineer named Korthver who had never seen combat before this mission. They stood together, confused and terrified as the manifestations approached them with what might have been curiosity. "Why?" Zarthik demanded, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and grief. "Why spare us? Why allow us to remember when you could easily edit our memories like the others?" The largest manifestation, a being of living obsidian that reflected the desert sky in its surface, spoke with a voice like grinding continents. Because consciousness is not merely about absorption and integration, it is about perspective, about the ability to see beyond the boundaries of one's own existence. Most beings cling to their individual identity because they fear dissolution. But you 5, you have already been dissolved by your experiences here. You have seen the futility of conquest, the temporary nature of power, the insignificance of your achievements in the face of geological time. The manifestation gestured toward the transformed landscape around them, where the former base camp had become a garden of living stone that breathed with the rhythm of the planet's heartbeat. You have been changed by your encounter with us, but not consumed. Your consciousness has been expanded, not absorbed. You remember not just what happened here, but what it means. And that makes you valuable in ways that simple absorption could never achieve. Korthver, the young engineer whose voice trembled with barely contained awe, stepped forward. "You're sending us home. You're letting us go back to tell others what we've seen." "We are doing more than that," the manifestation replied, its form shifting to reveal patterns that resembled star maps. "We are making you our ambassadors. Your species and the civilizations you serve will receive reports of this mission's failure. They will hear that 2,000 of their finest warriors were defeated by a primitive world with Stone Age inhabitants. Most will dismiss these reports as impossible, the ravings of survivors traumatized by unexpected defeat. The truth of Earth's deception began to crystallize in Zarthik's mind, but some will listen, some will remember. And when the next invasion force arrives, they might be prepared for something more than primitive humans with crude weapons. "Yes," the manifestation agreed, its voice carrying harmonics of approval. "And when they arrive with greater caution, with better preparation, with more sophisticated understanding of what they face, they will provide us with new perspectives, new technologies, new forms of consciousness to explore and integrate. Your survival serves our purposes by ensuring that future visitors will be more ... interesting." The realization that they were being used as unwitting agents of Earth's deception should have been devastating, but instead, Zarthik found himself filled with a strange sense of peace. They had been part of something larger than themselves, participants in a cosmic drama that had been playing out for billions of years. Their defeat had meaning, their survival had purpose, and their memories would carry the weight of truth even when that truth served the interests of their captors. As the 5 survivors were escorted to a single, functioning transport ship, the only piece of their original equipment that Earth had chosen to preserve, they carried with them more than just the memory of their defeat. They carried the knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy, other civilizations were already receiving the same false intelligence that had brought them here. The cycle would continue, world after world falling into Earth's ancient trap, their consciousness and technology absorbed into the planetary mind. But there was also hope, fragile as morning frost, but real nonetheless. The 5 survivors had been chosen specifically because their encounter with Earth had changed them in ways that made them resistant to the planet's influence. They had seen beyond the boundaries of their own existence, recognized the temporary nature of their achievements, and accepted their place in a universe far stranger and more wonderful than they had imagined. The transport ship lifted off from the surface of what had once been their base camp, its hull scarred but functional, its systems somehow restored to perfect working order. As they broke atmosphere and began the long journey home, Zarthik looked back at the blue-green world that had shattered everything he thought he knew about power, conquest, and the nature of existence itself. "What will we tell them?" asked Korthver, his young voice carrying the weight of impossible memories. "The truth," Zarthik replied, though he knew how that truth would be received. "We'll tell them that Earth is not what it appears to be. That humanity is not the dominant species on their world. That some planets are not meant to be conquered, but to be experienced, and we'll hope that someone, somewhere, will listen." As their ship disappeared into the star-filled darkness of space, Earth continued its ancient rotation, its consciousness expanded by the memories and experiences of nearly 2,000 new perspectives. The manifestations of living stone withdrew into the deeper layers of the planet's crust, where they would wait patiently for the next invasion force to arrive, drawn by reports of a primitive world ripe for conquest. The cycle would continue, as it had for millions of years, as it would for millions more. But now, somewhere in the galaxy, 5 beings carried the knowledge that Earth was not a world to be conquered, but a consciousness to be reckoned with. Ancient, patient, and infinitely hungry for new experiences. And in the depths of the planet's vast neural networks, the absorbed consciousness of nearly 2,000 Deathworlders continued their existence as part of something greater than themselves, their individual perspectives adding new dimensions to thoughts that spanned geological epochs. They had come as conquerors and remained as willing participants in the greatest mind the universe had ever produced. The 5 who returned would never forget their encounter with the living world, and their memories would serve as both warning and invitation for the civilizations that would inevitably follow. Earth waited, patient as stone, ancient as time, ready to welcome the next wave of visitors to its ever-expanding consciousness. After all, the planet had learned long ago that the most effective trap was one that its prey helped to bait.